Hi, I'm Spencer Ziegler.
Hi, I'm Mellisa Smith, and welcome to Data Lit, a podcast for educators by educators. So today we're bringing you another episode of Data Bytes, where we will be chatting about the different data that exists in our school system to give us and our listeners a more comprehensive feel of all the data that goes into running a school system. Today we have the pleasure of talking to Rob Siwiec, who's from our Office of Geospatial Analytics. Everybody go, ooh, because I didn't even know we had one.
Yeah,
so Rob, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us briefly what do you do in Wake County?
So I'm the Senior Director of Geospatial Analytics, and we are an office that formed out of student assignment. And we handle geospatial data that's used throughout the district, which means we tie all our data sets to a place, which for that kind of work is very important as far as assignment goes for students, and location and growth, proximity, all those factors that tie into the work we do.
So when I think of geospatial data, it sounds as though a lot of the data that you use is very visual. I'm imagining maps and, I don't know, geospatial for me, I think of rocks. I don't know why, don't ask me why I think of rocks, but I think of rocks.
The geo part.
Maybe.
Just maps to where rocks are.
Maybe that's where it is.
A map treasure
of
maps.
Rocks. But I'm thinking of a lot of maps and knowing where people are and assigning people so that we, for a district this big, we're having like maximum capacity. So we're allocating all of our resources, not just our students, our teachers, everything, and making sure that we maximize the size that we have, I guess, when I think of that. Is that kind of what geospatial data?
Yes, so we call it geospatial data. It's called spatial data sometimes too. We added the geo to it, and a lot of folks in our industry do, because you could look at maybe a CAD drawing or an architectural drawing, which is spatial, but it's not referenced on Earth. So our data has a reference point, and the size of our county, which is about 850 square miles,
right?
A huge area with, around 160 to 170,000 students. We have a need to measure all these things geographically, all the data we have, sites, student locations, routes, buses, bus stops.
Right.
Along with a lot of the information we get from other agencies out there, municipalities, the county data sets, census data. It can all be laid together in layers so we can study what's happening in our district.
So our first question we typically ask on this episode is, what does data literacy mean to you?
So data literacy to me, I look at a data set and I wonder, and I first think, where is it coming from? Say a student test score even.
Yeah.
That's from a student. That student lived somewhere. That student took the test somewhere. So when I see data, I tie it to a place. And I think most data, even though it's not spatial per se, can be tied to a spatial location. So you can look and study, analyze what's going on between place and the phenomenon you're trying to figure out.
That's so interesting, because when we think of data, so you started off with student achievement, right?
Yeah.
And we always try to figure out like a context.
Yeah.
You're looking at a lot of the contextual data that supports like a number. So there is a score that somebody got, but like you said, that score represents a student who's sitting in a class, who's sitting in a school, who's sitting in a town. It's just, I have not thought of data in that way.
And so much, I think, in education, the data we're working with is abstract. You're trying to measure what's inside someone's head.
Yeah.
And your data is, literally grounding it, in something that makes it a little bit easier to wrap your head around, I think.
Yeah.
And so what is some of that data that you interact with then?
Our data set that is the most important to our work is an address point inventory. So if you imagine, a map of Google Maps, and there's a dot on the map for every address residential, business, any type of facility throughout the whole county. And what we do there is, it's called geocoding. We'll take an address, text-based, and find the place in the county where that is, an XYZ.
Right.
And with that, we can we have a residential address for every student. First, the student can't enroll without an address in Wake County, so that's validation there. And with that address inventory, we have a very, very granular level of data that, you can't even get at the census, from the census. So working here is great to get that kind of level of every student's location to see, other factors geographically that could be impacting all sorts of things.
But you mentioned also that, you not only look at students' addresses, but you look at business addresses. So why would it be important to know, like, business address or a government address? Like, why is it not just student addresses that you look at?
One of the reasons is to make sure no one's saying they're somewhere in the county and they're not.
Okay.
And another reason is to have the history of an address may change rezoning. So lots of things can happen. We've had an address inventory now since about 1997 when they started in GIS.
Wow.
Before that, it was a list somewhere.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and I know we were talking at a department meeting last year about how education is a little bit unique in terms of data analysis because we know where all the stakeholders are.
Right.
And so we know exactly what percent of kids or teachers did something, where they were, all those other things where it's, November is coming up when this airs. And anytime you do polling, you really have no clue what percent voted, where they were, all those kind of things. It's really tough to do. But in education, when every single kid is here and you can map it, that seems like it allows for some advantages when we're looking at data.
Yeah. And also, too, I think it's interesting, to think of location. So where everything is, that's a piece of data that we have not really looked at. Most of the time, we're very, very focused on test scores, graduation rates. But where people are, how would we build new schools? We need that information to figure out where should a new school go, or where. We just had this come up in the news, where families be funneled to fund a new school? Are some schools overcrowded and undercrowded? I never really think of that kind of information until it comes up in the news, I'll be honest. But, kind of keeping everything balanced, I think, is probably really important for the folks on your team to kind of make sure that we're not, one school doesn't suffer and then there's another school that's sitting on and they're under enrolled, I guess. So it's kind of making sure that there's balance all across a district, as you said, as big as this. So that's probably very important to your team.
Yeah, not just balance, balance for a number of reasons, and then capacity of the school. And so with that student address geocode, that we have that going back, so many years, and we can that's used in forecasting along with municipal data and development coming up, so we can project growth in areas and where we need to kind of shift and look at assignment areas based on what's coming and what's happened in the past. And that's very important for this area because we haven't stopped.
Stop growing. Yeah.
And I just like the idea of kind of geotagging data to try to problem solve. Even at the school level, you can imagine if thinking about, where certain problem behavior is occurring in a class, and you might be able to kind of figure out some things by tagging data to a particular spot, during transitions at a particular bottleneck or something, we're seeing more. And then by looking at data with the location included, it might allow you to think about processes differently. So it might not have the fancy map that y'all put together, but it still allows for educators to think differently.
And I'm sure that when they're doing their data, they're looking at more patterns and trends, I guess. And I recognize that the data that they deal with is very visual. And so to kind of see movement, historical movement of what has been happening, I think is really important in the district as well, that kind of work.
Yeah. So what's something about the data that y'all work with that our listeners might find interesting?
One project that we worked on with DRA and testing data is an example. This is how we take that student residence information, residential location, and tie it back to a test score in a student, not where they took the test or what school they were at, but where they live. And we worked with the Intervention and Advanced Learning Services team for the academically and intellectually gifted program to develop a local norm to address the disproportionality of underrepresented students.
Oh, okay.
So rather than have the entire district on the state norm, we use that geocode data. For every third grader, we have a group of tests they all take at third grade, which gives us a great sample. It's everyone across the county.
Yeah.
And we run some spatial statistics there to find clusters of high-performing students and low-performing students. And with that information, we used about a mile distance for each student, all of the students within a mile of that student, their peers, another third grader who would have taken the test. We find these clusters of low scoring areas with high score outliers. Mm-hmm. And those students may not make that state norm percentile for AIG identification, but amongst their peer group locally, they are, well above.
Right.
So that kind of helped the AIG team identify more students for nomination that have normally been overlooked. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I love that. Find potential using that geolocation. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think, in the past we would have then had to rely on a school or on a parent trying to advocate. But I never thought of being able to use that sort of forecasting and mapping to make sure that we are extending opportunities to more students using something other than just, we are using test scores, but adding another layer onto that.
Right.
To see how we can broaden opportunities for more kids. That is really interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
So what data do you not currently have, but you wish you did?
So that's a good question. There's so much data here from every office, every area, and of course it can be tied to one of our sites or a bus or a route. We know it's there. We just haven't brought it into our system to give it that location aspect yet, and that's a challenge. But we'll get there. But one of the data sets I really would love to get would be student information after school, like.
Oh, what happens to kids after when they leave?
Yeah, so camps, local organizations where they track out camp and summer camps to, see how we could collaborate with the community or the towns to let them know there's kids that are tracking out and what programming they might want to offer to those students, and then work with them, for different year-round schools tracking out and different times of year. I think that would be a great set of data to have to kind of help the community.
With something like that, how do you factor in data privacy with your work?
Oh, yeah.
It's very strict. Most folks haven't seen our data or had access to it because of, the federal laws. And once you have an address, a student point right there, it's no matter what it's attached to it, even if it's a student ID, you have a location where a student lives. So right from there, it becomes private. And so, we can share within the district. But outside, we sort of, what we use is our census block groups, geographies to aggregate the data to a level that folks can have totals or counts or percentages within the county. And that's also aligned with other initiatives and other data from census variables, census information that we can work with. We can work with the communities rather than, solving things where there are other things going on that schools can't fix, but we can share information with them. So, one example was free and reduced lunch data, which is very private. But we were able to give counts at the block group level to share with the county, and they discovered some areas where they should have put food pantries and did. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so zooming out to the layer where it's no longer identifiable, but still actionable.
Yeah.
Rob, thank you so much for enlightening us, helping us understand locations and spatial data. To our listeners, thank you for listening. If you have any questions, comments, or further notes, don't forget that you can always reach us at www.wcpss.net/datalit. Thank you to Rolesville Middle School's Jamaal Wellman for the theme music. And until next time, bye.
Take care.